Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! No, we don't play Yu-Gi-Oh! Anymore. Of video game news for Friday, November 8th. I'm still trying to tweak my settings, and you know what? If I'm tweaking my settings, I might as well experiment with using HEVC, high efficiency, or video codec, I believe is what that stands for, instead of what is probably at least 8-year-old standard of the 264, 265 compression. We'll see if YouTube handles that any better and if the quality is any better there. But yeah, at one point in the last stream, it looked pretty good, and then I started fiddling with it, and it started to look pretty bad. So yeah, the problem here is my preview does not show me what the video looks like once YouTube has handled it. My preview only shows me what I'm getting as far as basically the recording format, which is always going to be very high quality unless I really screw up the settings. And yeah, I don't know what changed here. So far so good though, I'll say, for today. It looks like we're not dropping any frames. But yeah, there's a delicate balance in trying to not have it drop frames and also have it show the visuals correctly, which, yeah, particularly for what I'm doing. If it's blurry, if it doesn't load, it's pretty useless video at that point. Maybe that's part of the reason why I don't get that many views, is that maybe there are people out there that are just watching at lower resolutions instead of live streaming at 1080p, 60 frames per second. And maybe the quality is just really poor at that. And I don't know how to really fix that other than to have less text, which isn't going to work, or have bigger text, which could work. I could certainly double the size of everything and make everything gigantic, but that would be a lot less text actually on screen, and it would be a lot of work. Even though we don't play Yu-Gi-Oh, they are apparently at their 1,000-day point now, so it's been slightly below 3 years that Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel has been around, and thus they're giving up some new rewards. That being said, that 1,000-day point, I guess, is where mobile games, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel is in that category of mobile games, tend to start to fail, in that it is really a tough commitment, frankly, for anybody to put 1,000 days into to commit to playing a game, or even sticking with a game over the course of 1,000 days, even if you're not playing every single day. But yeah, a lot of mobile games too, if you're not playing every single day, you're probably going to get bored and move on to something else. Speaking of getting bored and moving on to something else, I finished the probably going to get me demonetized titled game, The Suicide of Rachel Foster. And I will spoil just the ending just a little bit to say there is an achievement that you unlocked one way at the very ending that they changed to unlock the exact opposite way. And without going into great details and really spoiling it, the 7-hour journey up until that point or so, it felt like it was about 7 hours, has you interacting with objects very minimally. You'll pick up a flashlight and you'll shine a flashlight somewhere. You'll look at an object, you'll observe the object. Maybe you'll pick up a key, and then when you pick up a key, that lets you unlock a door, but you're not even interacting with the key into a lock into a door. You're just, I now own this key, the door is magically now unlocked. So the achievement takes 5 interactions that don't really make a lot of sense, And even despite the achievement, if you ignore it, that final ending section basically gave me the exact opposite outcome than I was expecting. I was expecting that you would get the good ending by doing nothing and not committing to something, and instead you get the bad ending by taking too long or doing nothing. So yeah. Now, on a bigger point, I will say that even from the title, you know it's not going to be a particularly happy game, and knowing that Daedalic published it, you know that there's a decent chance it's not going to have a happy ending, and it doesn't, which is really crazy now that they have announced a sequel to it. But yeah, it wasn't a good game, at least in the English version. I am in this weird spot where the finals is still around. Interesting. And has made it back to the top 100. Yeah, I am in this weird spot because I know it's probably a German language first game, even though the story takes place in Montana in a hotel much like the Shining's hotel, and they rip off The Shining quite a bit. But then you also look at some of the Unity, I mean, in this case it was Unreal Engine assets that they've basically just flipped. I mean, it is a dangerously close to an asset flip game. And it's clear that a German person picked those assets. Because you look at the toilet, and it's the East Germany block style toilets that have basically a shelf on them where the water swoops over the shelf when you flush, but it's basically dry as you go. Yeah, and there's no other country that had the toilet shelf really, other than Eastern Bloc Germany, where so many people had worms that they were using that to inspect whether or not they had worms. At least that's my understanding of why it's designed that way. And then you'll see just some other things that just really don't make sense as far as why they would be in a Montana hotel at all. And then that plays the worst as far as the dialogue, because in the dialogue, words are just not being translated right. And I thought it was an unreliable narrator thing, but that never really pays off at all. And I just really feel like it was bad translations. For instance, they said at one point you found a hair ribbon in one line of dialogue. You never find a hair ribbon. As far as I can tell, there is no hair ribbon in the game at all. It's just something that was clearly a thought that they were going to put in the dialogue, and then they just had voice actors voice those lines without really having a script supervisor look at it. And the script is all this game has, really. I'm bearing the lead, or not talking about the elephant in the room too, and this is another thing that definitely deserves to be condemned in the suicide of Rachel Foster. The whole game centers around the father of the protagonist having a, let's call it what it normally would be called, pedophilic affair with a 16-year-old, I believe, and getting her pregnant, which leads in part to her demise. And they totally normalize that relationship. The protagonist does not want to think badly of her father, which is somewhat believable, but there's just no real pushback on it. The father shows absolutely no regret at all, and the story in total and the themes around it just does not condemn it at all, which it's not good. And it's worth pointing out that the 16-year-old victim of grooming there also had dyslexia and was probably emotionally disturbed by being called names for having dyslexia in the time that this was said. There's weirdness in that you get this first generation cell phone and they call it a cell phone when first generation cellular phones would have been clearly described as cellular phones. Nobody would have shortened it to cell phones that early. If anything, they would have tried to think of some other kind of buzzword to promote it as. And then there's just no logic in the fact that the cell phones work in the middle of a snowstorm, where landlines have a much higher chance of working in the middle of a snowstorm. Like landline phones, the original old-fashioned ones that before they were turned all digital on the back end, would have worked with power being completely out, because they provide their own power, which is part of the danger of cell phone wires. Is it's when a cell phone is when a landline phone is ringing, an original landline, it was putting, I think, somewhere around 90 volts through very small wires for a brief second there, or for the seconds that it was ringing. But yeah, there's just nothing in that game. It's just yet another disappointing walking simulator. I don't know why you keep trying them when it definitely feels like Gone Home was really the only good one to ever catch my attention. And it definitely feels like Gone Home has perhaps just inoculated me against ever having that same experience again with a walking simulator. Inherently, though, Gone Home is written very well, and the theming and setting I think was done very well, whereas the Rachel Foster game seems to have wanted to take the game into more of a different direction, where Gone Home feels like it's going to go more supernatural and spooky, and it really doesn't. Rachel Foster kind of implies it will go more supernatural and spooky, although there's really not enough evidence to say that any of that was actually supernatural and spooky. The way the game ends, you could assume that the protagonist you were playing as was dreaming or just hallucinating and was crazy the whole time. Because yeah, there's just a ton of stuff that does not make logical sense. A bloody blanket shows up at one point from 10 years in the past. There's no way anything covered in blood in 10 years would still be washable or dirty in any way that you could get it out. It would be a long set in stain that would just stay there forever. Earlier in the game, a type of lipstick that the protagonist says hasn't been made for 10 years shows up, and yeah, you almost have to assume that that's supernatural, but then later in the game they say the lipstick actually wasn't supernaturally placed there. So yeah, inherently it feels like what should have happened with Rachel Foster, and I'll stop talking about it here in a second, is that throughout the entirety of the game it felt like it was written in such a way that you could have multiple theories and that there would be multiple endings to support those multiple theories, and that there could be the protagonist is just crazy ending, or there could be it really is a ghost just ending. But even though it feels like for every line of dialogue that's the case, it's just not true. There's literally only one ending as far as I can tell, and the ending you get doesn't support any theory really that you could possibly have built up with. It's a theory you could have had, certainly, that would have made some sense, but then you would have gotten no evidence for 7 hours of gameplay that would have supported that theory. They went out of their way for the ending to not be plausibly guessed by anyone. due to just 7 hours of red herrings. Yeah. And that's not a fun experience, certainly. To waste 7 hours effectively doing nothing in a walking simulator just to be told a pretty simplistic story. Yeah. And it definitely was a story that you needed to have better come to like the characters involved, most of which are being talked about in the abstract from a past. So you're not really seeing those characters or interacting with those characters. Yeah. And yeah, there's just a lot of different endings there that would have been more interesting twists that I thought of. And that's going to be true for anybody who's even slightly creative, is you're going to think of a better ending than what you get in Rachel Foster, and then you're going to be disappointed that you didn't get it. Yeah, I don't think they planned for a sequel at all. I think Tencent, now owning Daedalic, is probably pressuring Daedalic as a publisher to try and make some more money, and the actual developer of Rachel Foster probably is looking to make some money and get funded. So they're promoting a sequel to something that probably sold a little bit better than it should have. Anyways, let's move on with the news. I already started very late today, and that certainly was a problem too. I am in this very tight window of time that I have, and these streams have been going fairly long. So, yeah. I really should not be rambling on too much. I did manage to do some other tweaks. Not so much to this chart, but to my programs and macros to make YouTube shorts. Noticeably, I think I've gotten all the YouTube shorts scheduled for a while. My chart probably here has not changed any, although visually it looks like it is higher up. So maybe there is some bit of text that has bumped it up. Like Rainbow Six Siege. I don't know though. How could anything be new to the chart? Yeah, I don't think anything's gonna change until a long time. Yeah, inherently I need to rethink this chart because it's getting just very subtle changes, and all we're gonna see is just like this leftmost one change probably, until there was some massively new popular game that people played forever. But yeah, that doesn't come around too often. As far as Steam, I don't have anything for sale too much. When did this game came out? Mobinogi. Adventure X Narrative Games Convention. Mini promotion there. Icarus. Well, the front page is showing me some new stuff. So yeah, what I tweaked specifically was to go ahead and just close any YouTube short that has an ESRB rating of M for mature, because my OBS doesn't have the right cookies to show those, and so I've let a couple of YouTube shorts pop up where it's just the age gate and nothing else, and I can't figure out how to get past the age gate and get the cookies right in OBS, which, yeah, I'd like that to work, because when you're talking games like Call of Duty, rated M for mature is not as big of a deal as other M for mature games. And it is weirdly unfair to bigger console released games that are going to get ESRB ratings. of M versus PC games that probably would get an M from the ESRB if they tried to get a rating, but they don't, so they won't. They don't even bother because there's no limitation there. Supermarket Simulator is doing a sale, 30% off. Maybe that's a deal, maybe it isn't. I heard on Reddit, between way too many political posts, the hope for me was that there would be a lot less of that after the general election in the United States, but no such luck. But I heard on a unrelated topic that the Gabe Newell character, I guess he's a real person, yeah, apparently owns several fleets, owns almost an, well, they said he owned an armada of private yachts, which is weird. Certainly I wouldn't picture Gabe Newell being on a yacht, but I was just gonna throw it out there. He does not seem to be that kind of person, but then I guess in general rich people probably buy yachts and boats for a lot of reasons and then never use them. There might be some decent financial money hiding, tax avoiding schemes around buying yachts. There might be. There was some speculation that maybe it was some germophobia things there. And the bigger reveal there is that Reddit at least thinks that Gabe Newell is incredibly filthy rich. Which he probably is rich, but I'm not sure incredibly filthy rich, like into the $40 billion range. But that's one of the problems in the United States, is the rich oligarchs are very good about hiding their money and staying under the radar, and so there's really no good knowledge at all as far as who is the actual richest people in the world, or how much money they really have hoarded. The one thing I will say is it does at least seem like Gabe Newell, like a lot of some of the rich people, it does seem like he's spending a lot of his money investing into other projects and other companies, some of which don't sound too awful. That being said, Bill Gates also started the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and eventually became fairly obvious that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was just a way of avoiding paying taxes and was not particularly a good charity or foundation, and in its many years of existence has not proven itself to really accomplish anything particularly good. Then later on we found out Bill Gates was also yet another accomplice of, might as well call them accomplices, acquaintance of Jeffrey Epstein. Yep. So there's this game Icarus from 2021 that is player versus event survival game for up to 8 players. So that's older. The Adventure X Narrative Games Convention seems like it's going to promote, well, I have heard of Lamplight City, probably because it's a point and click as we stay behind. Looks slightly interesting. So yeah, seems like adventure is going to boil down to mostly point and click adventure. the big adventure game to talk about right now is Indiana Jones. And DF Retro did, in their most recent podcast, which I guess I am watching their weekly podcast, kind of talk about the slowness and the punishing nature of Indiana Jones, in that you will get punished if you try and just run and gun with it. And they compared it to the Riddick game that the developer of Indiana Jones had made earlier. Now, weirdly, in the footage I saw, it does kind of feel like Indiana Jones is just kind of crawling around too much and hiding around corners too much for my taste, but yeah, there's gonna be some trade-offs certainly to make it a video game where there's just gonna be a lot more motion. Talos Principle 2 is more of a puzzle game in my opinion than a adventure game, but the sense of adventure could be in so many different games. So there's going to be several presentations for this Adventure X, which seems like it's mostly going to be speeches. I can't help from the outside looking in, having only really a minimal amount of programming skill, but I can't help that part of the problem with the gaming industry is that too many people have the microphone and too few people have actual qualifications. 100% that is definitely the case in education, where you will have people teaching how to program video games who very likely have never programmed a video game professionally in their life. But also you have small indie companies or even YouTubers. Game Maker's Toolkit is probably a great example, and I mostly like the videos I've seen from him, but he is a great example of somebody who really doesn't have any games under his belt. He's about to release a game that he's made himself, but he's been running a YouTube channel for many years before releasing a game, talking about game design as if he was an expert, and there's just really no expertise there. And my fear is that that's kind of always the case, and so it is the blind leading the blind, or in the case of the video game industry, it's the SJWs leading the SJWs. That certainly would explain some of the nonsense you see in game design in general, where you have a overemphasis on accessibility, but then implementations of accessibility features that just don't make any sense, such as having somebody sign language the words that are being spoken in a game when the game already has written subtitles. And sign language is not universal. There's an American sign language, and then there's a European sign language at least, and there might very well be Asian countries different sign languages too. And even if that was the case, you still could just have translated subtitles, way easier than having a sign language person. And the only reason why you might have sign language is if you're trying to assist people who are deaf and dyslexic, or babies who can't read but no baby sign language. But that really wouldn't have made a lot of sense in most games. It just seems like it makes no sense at all. And yeah, you certainly could get into more controversial topics about how some game developers are just wildly for making more butch looking women in their games, or just unattractive women in their games, as a way of them not being ogled, which, yeah, seems like it kind of has the opposite effect too, just to have ugly characters that people won't want to play and won't want to look at. And honestly, that's less of a issue than the issue of game sequels being made that just drastically change the characterizations of already established characters. And that's been going on for a very long time. You have the Tomb Raider reboots making Lara Croft come off as very weak and timid in the first game, and oddly brutalizing her through every death sequence, and brutalizing her physically in sequences that are unavoidable. That first game in particular just really went out of its way to injure or stab her through the guts with a metal spike. Was one unavoidable sequence there. But you know, the death sequences were even more gory if you happen to see any. Yeah. So inherently, I guess that's a long way of saying I don't recognize any of these names as far as these presenters. And I don't recognize this Adventure X event at all, so this may be a very small thing. Although that is another weird thing, is that like Game Maker's Toolkit, as a YouTuber, somehow made a game jam, and Inscription, I believe, was originally thought up and made. A small portion of Inscription was thought up and made during Game Maker's Toolkit's game jam. So yeah, there is some weird success there too. Not sure what you could really do to make adventure games more popular. It definitely seems like if adventure games were on cell phones by default, then that would probably work a lot better, and there'd just be less competition overall, instead of it being a situation where you have a game like this that's pixely and might be interesting to me, but most people would just dismiss, versus Call of Duty Black Ops, which is hyper realistic. Like, those two types of games just cannot fairly be compared to each other. And this game, Mabinogi, as an MMO, has apparently been around since 2012. And yeah, it's not particularly well received in the last 30 days. And it apparently got some kind of review bomb at some point. There's been some more speculation as we go into the Video Games Chronicle news as far as what this new what the new Destiny child from Shift Up game, which really wouldn't be from Shift Up, it would be from the subsidiary of Com2Us. In it, there's some history of Com2Us having one previous mobile game and it being extremely expensive. And yeah, that is fairly believable, that if it is a case that the original Destiny child wasn't making enough money to keep Shift Up interested enough to keep it going, while also getting funding from Sony to make Stellar Blade, which honestly I wouldn't be surprised if that wasn't really the issue, and it really was just an issue of Shift Up only had so many people in its company, and if they had tried to double the number of people that were employed in a fast rate to make Stellar Blade, that would have ruined the dynamics of the company, and it's just not a great way. Like, unfortunately, scaling up doesn't really work in most offices, but particularly in creative endeavors like making video games. So that the only way you see people do that is that you just form entirely new studios in entirely different places, and then you can just try to have a new dynamic and hope it's good without ruining your existing dynamic of workers. But yeah, it's definitely believable that the new Destiny Child game could be very different. It could never actually get made, and yes, it could be very, very expensive, which might keep it going for longer to get a proper conclusion, or it might just cause it to fail by being too expensive. The reason, almost certainly, why Com2uS has signed an agreement for the IP of Destiny Child to use it, to license it, is that not only are you getting 500 characters in live 2D animation style already made, you're also getting a massive amount of backstory on those characters, assuming you use that backstory. Like, Destiny Child gave a lot of content, frankly, so every single one of those 500 characters had a backstory. A lot of those characters played directly into the main story, so you would see them around also. And so, yeah, there's just a lot of content there that has already been made. Arguably, there was too much content in Destiny Child near the end. They added a whole bunch of features at the end that were very much trying to attract, I think, more whales and late game players. There were a few features that they promised very early, thinking they were going to go one way, and then those features took forever to actually get made, and at least one of them never got made. But yeah, in Destiny Child there is this minuscule level up system in the spa system, which added a lot of extra work for a minimal amount of extra dialogue and imagery, as far as sending your characters into a hot spa. There was a puppet collection system which had chibi puppet versions of the characters, which weren't very visually attractive to look at. Ironically, that's all that the Cardcaptor Sakura game it has, is a bunch of chibi puppet characters, or chibi characters, little Funko Pop type figures that are not visually interesting. I'm still playing the Cardcaptor Sakura game minimally once every couple days. Still playing Pokemon the trading card game. That is so brand new though. I do think it is going to probably start adding more events and making itself more of a game and something you can really revisit. The current event has wait timers on how many times you can play that event in single player mode and actually play Pokemon card games. And yeah, I would like to see that go away. If an event is happening, you shouldn't be then limited by a wait timer to be able to play. Although you only expend the energy to play a game when you win, so it's a win wait timer instead of a try wait timer, if that makes any sense. But yeah, I guess that's all I have to say about that. I really am rambling, but I'm not dropping frames, and I will say that the frame rate here looks pretty solid at 2,600 kilobits per second or so. So that may not be exactly the highest frame rate ever, but fingers crossed this stream will actually look good when I go back and look at it. Anyways, let's go through Video Games Chronicle news. Nintendo and the Pokemon Company are seeking an injunction and damages from Palworld developer Pocket Pair. This seems like old news. We had already known this. This is one of those rare examples also where the headline is too long. Both companies want 5 million yen each in addition to the injunction. Yep. And we have to cross our fingers and hope they don't get it, because we don't need a new era in Japan of big companies that barely make games, and in the case of Nintendo and the Pokemon Company, only really make games for Nintendo consoles, being able to sue anything that they even perceive as competition out of existence. But yeah, it'll probably be a long time before we see any real resolution to this. Meanwhile, Nintendo is getting some kind of press. Is it good press? Probably in Japan it might actually be good press. They may very well be winning the war of the hearts and minds of Japanese players who very possibly have never even seen Palworld, let alone played it, and may very well just assume that it is a complete ripoff of Pokemon, which it isn't. You'd kind of even think here that this is a image where there's Pokemon on one side and Palworld Pals on the other, but these are all Palworld Pals, which certainly is an argument to how easy it would be to confuse the two if you're not really informed about the Pokemon. Although inherently that is making an argument that people who don't play Pokemon are assuming that Palworld is a complete ripoff of Pokemon. People who do play Pokemon or play Palworld would probably be able to tell you very clearly the differences between the two characters, groups of characters. Take-Two's CEO says that he's not worried about GTA 6 performance on the Xbox Series S. Zelnick also emphasized the importance of publishing on PC to the company, which, yeah, it definitely seems like they are somewhat focused on that. That being said, the most recent Take-Two game, which would have to be released on PC, would have been the very old Red Dead Redemption game, and yeah, there's questionable, I think, polish on that release. Certainly, one would assume that GTA 6 would be much more polished to run on modern computers and run well. I also heard that Hello Remastered game, Shadows of the Damned Hello Remastered, I believe is what it was. According to DF Retro, they took a Unreal Engine 3 game and somehow put it into, upgraded it into Unreal Engine 5, and then really didn't optimize it at all, so it actually runs way worse, particularly on like the PlayStation 5 versus playing the PlayStation 4 version. Moving on, EA Sports FC 25 Ballon d'Or event kicks off this week, with several characters being included in the promotion. I have no idea what the Ballon d'Or event is. I would assume it is a football/soccer event. Soccer is very weird around the world in that there isn't really leagues or even specific rules on the sizes of fields. Is this a intergender event? Kind of seems like it is. Interesting. I don't know if they play against each other or if they just take turns playing against other teams of the same genders. You know, with the rules and the leagues not being kind of not set in stone, you could see how soccer could become much more intermixed gendered. Apparently, the reporting is Macaulay Culkin is joining season 2 of Amazon's Fallout show. Culkin will reportedly play a crazy genius type character. I guess maybe replacing the crazy genius type character that you had at the beginning of the Fallout series. There is, I guess, a small possibility that Culkin is also just going to be playing that same character but younger in some weird way. Culkin, for his actual age, looks fairly young in this picture. I guess the only real question here is it really time now that Amazon Prime is going to benefit by celebrity casting, or have they decided that actually they're not going to really get a boost through celebrity casting Macaulay Culkin, so let's just get it out of the way and announce it now before it leaks? I don't know if you really are going to get a boost from it. Yeah. There is certainly that danger that people will just not tune back into Fallout when its next season airs, because it does just take so long to make things. I really wish we somehow could financially find a way to make entire 5-season runs of TV shows in secret before even the first episode airs, but yeah, that's never going to happen. That would, I guess, happen if there was a grant system, if it was more of a socialized country that just said, we're going to give you grants to make 100 episodes of this series, and then we'll air it on TV, but we're not expecting it to make any money back, or requiring it to pay any of that money back. Which, yeah, I don't even think the BBC really. No, the BBC very much claims, and probably is, self-funded. So yeah, I don't think there's a single country I can really point to that has done something like that. Yeah. There is, I guess, another thought as far as just where Macaulay Culkin might be in his life, too. That there is the Will Wheaton problem, certainly, in that at any point Macaulay Culkin could get canceled or become obnoxious, and then a kind of beloved childhood actor might be a problem to be involved in a project. Macaulay Culkin in his past certainly has not seemed like he was in a good mental state or physical state to be an actor, and he certainly hasn't been taking a ton of roles, so yeah, this definitely feels like more stunt casting than anything else, which could be fine. Certainly they did a lot of that in the first season too. It's just a character here or a character there that really was more of a stunt casted character. It's going to show up for a second and then get killed or leave town and never show up again. And that kind of is in line with the Fallout games overall, is that you enter a town and there are some kind of weird characters. That was one of the things that was weird about Torchlight 2, is that Felicia Day almost certainly was added as a character just for one line of dialogue in some kind of update in Torchlight 2 at the very end of the game. The character is named Felicia. The character has red hair, looks very much like what Felicia Day would have looked like at the time, but she is not credited in the credits, because I definitely looked for it to see, yeah, just to make certain that it was Felicia Day. And yeah, Felicia Day also might be stunt cast into the Fallout universe, but if she is, she would probably have to be the same character that she was stunt casted into Fallout New Vegas, which would be kind of weird. The Sony president reflects on why Concord failed. Hiroki Totoki discusses on what went wrong and how PlayStation can learn from it. Inherently, I think a lot of people would say that if you want to learn from it, the first thing you cannot do is lay off everybody and shut down the project completely, because then you go from people who actually worked on the project self-reflecting and trying to improve to having completely unassociated people trying to dig through the history of other employees if you're really trying to figure out what went wrong, which is, yeah. really it's just a top-down decision. It's the same old thing. They're giving money hats, for lack of a better term, to tentpole projects and overfunding giant tentpole projects, many of which are just trying to follow trends that are 4 years old or older, and with no real artistic vision or inspiration behind it. You just look at these characters. I don't think many people could even tell you the names of these characters, let alone the backstory of them or anything that would make them slightly attractive or people you'd want to spend a lot of time with. Sega has sold the Humankind developer Amplitude. Studio's most recent game was last year's Endless Dungeon. Sega is doing some weirdness, I think. That this might have been specifically Sega Europe, and this might be specifically a case of Sega disinvesting in Sega Europe overall. We may start to see a lot more financial dealings from Japanese-centric companies like Sega, and where they sell off companies or try to acquire companies or just try to sue companies, as they may be struggling to actually make games, and Sega themselves have always struggled to make games people actually liked. A lack of PS5 Pro shortages means some scalpers are reselling at a loss. Instead, it's the disk drive that's being sold at higher prices. So yeah, that's good news for people who are not trying to resell and scalp. Although, I will say, you gotta get your bread however you can. That's probably a rap lyric from some song. In that, there's a lot of hate for scalpers and price gouging on individuals doing it, when there is severely less of that, less hate when price gouging happens at your grocery store, at the gas station, where it is affecting hundreds, thousands, maybe tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people. And yeah, that is, it feels a little backward to me, and certainly it is one of the problems with capitalism that I think people turn a blind eye to or just fail to recognize, is that there are basically no socially acceptable ways to try and pull yourself up by the bootstraps, other than being exploited by somebody else and just hopefully getting lucky that you're not so overly exploited that you actually can take home enough of a paycheck to gain some money. But yeah, anybody that is an entrepreneur, anybody that's running their own business, gets pooped on a lot more than the big companies, when there's a lot more reason to hate on Walmart than there is to hate on each individual person trying to sell and scalp PS5s. And maybe that is unique to gamers, but I think it's kind of common to many industries. The other thing to point out is there is definitely more talk about panic buying pre possible tariffs as far as gaming equipment goes. Software could probably be downloaded without any tariffs, almost certainly. Discs possibly could be burned inside of the United States to avoid tariffs. Inherently, if there was a disc pressing plant in the United States, I'm not sure that there actually is, as far as Blu-ray PS5 style discs or Xbox Series X discs. So yeah, there's at least one story on Reddit of one company buying a year's worth of their supply and canceling all their employees' Christmas bonuses because of panic buying for fear of tariffs. But the real thing to buy as far as individual gamers would probably be just new PCs. I mean, there really is an argument now to buy all the equipment. Cases probably won't go up too much, but like CPUs, GPUs, RAM, motherboards, just buy a whole new computer now for fear that it might be significantly more expensive later. And certainly with the AMD 9800 3D XD chip that was just announced and that sounds to be really good, there's definitely an argument that if you want the top of the line, you're probably going to have to buy that or pay tariffs in the future to get a slightly cheaper version that may not make up the difference. Now, I don't think AMD has a new GPU, so you may be a generation behind on that. And yeah, it's a weird situation, particularly for me. Still coming out of house remodeling, a lot of money was spent there, and recouping that money is almost certainly a possibility. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some major Black Friday purchases with perhaps very minor hardware sales. It probably makes a lot of sense to buy a TV if you're in the market for a TV on Black Friday. It probably makes sense to buy any consoles you don't own, although most of the consoles are already going to be out. But yeah, anything that's not made domestically in the United States, if you're not a United States citizen, might very well go up significantly in price if tariffs are applied to it. And this isn't me just trying to cause panic, but just shopping advice here. So buying as much as you can now might save you in the long run. Of course, most people don't have extra cash to buy anything extra, and it's not going to help you in many situations. Certainly if they come out with a new AMD GPU, well, it'll be too late then. When the Nintendo Switch 2 comes out, very possibly will be too late then if these tariffs really show up, which is an if. Certainly we never know what really is going to happen in the future. But yeah, there's arguments for TVs, arguments for refrigerators, appliances. The truth is very little is actually made in the United States domestically. Even cars, which are a lot of which are made domestically in the United States, have significant amounts of components that are bought from way too many different distributors for a whole nother boondoggle of a reason. But yeah, there's just nothing actually bought made in the United States. And if you slowly turned up tariffs in the United States, eventually you probably would allow for the, I would estimate about 25 years it would take to pass where the United States would be back to making a lot more products domestically. But to just turn up the tariffs to the max on day one will not really encourage any company to bring factories to the United States. But yeah, even furniture is often just shipped either from Mexico or China. That would be one industry that could be brought back to furniture assembly factories, furniture manufacturing plants that could be brought to the United States fairly quickly, maybe 5 years, maybe even less. But electronics are way more complicated than that. Certainly, and that's what most people, most gamers are going to be buying. Anyways, moving on with news. PS5 has hit 65 million, as Sony says to expect a mix of single player and service games, which, wow. So multiplayer is dead in the mind of Sony, I guess, at this point. There's just no concept of a multiplayer game that isn't also some kind of live service game. Sony's gaming business forecasts record profits partially due to third-party games. I wonder how much that balances out with the rest of Sony's parent company's financials. Yeah. Well, obviously Video Games Chronicles is probably not going to talk about that. There's several presentation pictures here I guess you could look at if you're interested. Astrobot has sold 1.5 million copies, Sony confirms. Team Asobi platformer was released in September. Yep. That was probably one of the last games I heard a lot of people talking about. But also, like all games, particularly single player games, you're going to hit the end and hit the credits, and then there's not going to be too much more to say about it. I do think there was one update that's happened fairly recently for Astrobot. The Mass Effect TV series was announced. Well, it's now officially in development. A reporter says the Fast and the Furious 9 writer Daniel Casey is going to be writing this Amazon MGM show. I also heard speculation that it's probably going to be a side story that is not going to involve the Shepard, and I believe that was the protagonist in Mass Effect, or anything that happened in the actual games, and it probably isn't going to follow the story of Andromeda, since that was received very poorly. But yeah, Mass Effect sold itself certainly on the player controls the outcome, so different players would have had very different experiences with their Shepard protagonist, and so I don't think you can canonize any one Shepard story too much, although you probably have to canonize at least one of the 3 different endings of Mass Effect 3 to make the next Mass Effect game. Gears of War E-Day will see Marcus and Dom's usual voice actors returning again. John DiMaggio and Carlos Ferro will once again take the roles. Gears of War E-Day was a game that was announced with a trailer a couple months ago, and then I kind of already forgotten it. It doesn't have a release window. It's set 14 years before the events of the first game, and it's bringing back Marcus and Dom as the main protagonist instead of what the previous, most recent Gears of War game tried to do, which was to take it in a very different direction and have Dom, I believe, or Marcus, one of those two, be kind of the older character being replaced by a new, younger female character. Which that's just not what Gears of War set itself up to be. It could have, it would have been better if the previous game, most recent game to be released, was more of a spin-off, and that they had released a more true to form game, then released a spin-off, not just try to replace it. Or you just leave Gears of War alone. That being said, I guess the same argument would have probably been made for God of War, and the God of War reboot, turning it into Dad of War, seemed to work to gain a new audience and carry over a lot of the old audience. That being said, I still kind of wish that there was more of a traditional God of War series reboot, but that's almost certainly never going to happen. The original God of War series, I don't think particularly sold particularly well, not they were always on consoles, PlayStation consoles and such, that I didn't have, so I barely played a few hours of God of War, one of the older God of War games. Warner Brothers says Multiverses is one reason its games division is substantially underperforming. The fighting game was blamed for a 100 million hit in the year-on-year Q3 gaming revenue. It's probably a little unfair to blame any specific game, particularly since I think Warner Brothers is probably just doing some shady accounting here and probably bearing $100 million that was lost and spent on the Suicide Squad game. But let's assume that this really is Multiverse's fault. That's fairly believable. Like, they've got a decent number of characters now, finally, in their game, but I haven't heard anybody talk about this game, anybody really want to play this game as far as a Smash Bros. Clone. The truth is, there may just not be that many people who are even that interested in Smash Brothers or Smash Brothers clones in the first place. Fighting games, particularly Smash Brothers clone fighting games, are basically a niche on a niche. Here they have an avid trailer for Raven, which I would say this Raven does not particularly scream Raven to me in the way she's 3D modeled. She doesn't feel like she's from Teen Titans or Teen Titans Go, or which is where you'd probably recognize Raven mostly from. Like, sure, she's been in other comics and other forms of media, but not very recognizable visually. And inherently, that's kind of the problem here with a lot of these characters. Scale is kind of questionable on some of the creatures. And then you have like Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, who are not in any form factor that is particularly recognizable at all. Like, seems like they let the artists go way too wild when they should have locked down all the animators and said this Superman needs to look like a Superman from probably the original Superman cartoons, or at least something that felt more like Superman. This broad chest is just way too big on him, and Wonder Woman should probably look like where she would have been most popular in whichever Justice League cartoons. Yeah, you probably get Justice League cartoon, the most popular Justice League cartoon, to do these three different characters. But yeah, then you also need to get scale right. And then there just are some characters that I don't think a lot of people are going to particularly care about playing as. In a funny way, I wonder if fighting with these characters is kind of probably a big problem too, in that maybe people would be more interested if you could do more of a Kingdom Hearts style game, or even do a like film studio creator type game with these characters. Put them in different scenarios, solve different puzzles, or do a Kingdom Hearts where you're one protagonist running into all these characters. Kingdom Hearts would definitely be worth trying, you know. Just have one protagonist going to different worlds, running into these characters, getting quests from these characters, and then solving those quests. This very well may be the aftermath of LEGO Dimensions, getting all of these companies to share their characters, although in this case this is just all Warner Brothers properties anyways, so it's just one company promoting their multitude of properties they now own, probably through a lot of acquisition. But yeah, LEGO Dimensions also didn't succeed as well as it probably should have, considering how groundbreaking the concept was, that you would just have different characters from different license holders all in the same game. I'm not sure this game is actually out yet. I guess it is. This game launched in early access in June, so technically not actually out. But the controversial shooter 6 Days in Fallujah gets its first documentary story missions. I would have to read this article to know what that really means and to remind myself in particular what the controversy was in particular. And certainly we aren't in a position where playing this kind of game on Twitch or YouTube is likely to get you any real success. I could see you getting banned. I could see the game being completely banned from Twitch. I could see people just not particularly interested. Very notably, gamers are not very interested in accurate modern military depictions. They want fast-paced action, almost sci-fi depictions these days when it comes to military shooters. Roblox has announced new measures to protect under 13s and other players. Unrated experiences, socials, hangouts, and freeform user creation will all be restricted. And Multiversus Season 4 adds 2 new characters, Raven from DC Comics and Merceline from Adventure Time. These might be slightly older stories, but they seem new. NVIDIA streaming service GeForce Now is going to limit players to 100 hours per month. Existing members won't be affected for another year. If you bought the Founders Pack of the game, you won't seemingly be affected at all. 100 hours a month breaks down to roughly 3 hours a day, which is certainly a lot for your average person to be playing 3 hours a day every day for an entire month. Perhaps not enough time if you are, say, playing as a YouTuber or content creator, where you would have to be playing 8 hours a day, but then you probably wouldn't be using a streaming service like GeForce Now to do that. And certainly maybe not enough time if you have 3 or 4 kids, each playing an hour every day or more. Yeah. So, like many of these streaming offerings, the price in some way or another is going up. The price may also be going up too, so yeah. It is certainly a damning statement to point out that the only news that has been reported around GeForce Now in probably at least half a year, if not a year or more, is that GeForce Now is getting worse. And yeah, it's when you know your product isn't really growing or getting better, and probably isn't going to succeed. Tencent has confirmed layoffs at Shark Mob in London. The studio reportedly canceled the project earlier this year. So, okay. Xbox 360 players say they're having problems connecting online. Players logged in with an app password say they've stopped working. Yeah. It may be time. It may finally be time that if you have an old Xbox 360, it may be finally time to buy an Xbox Series S, so you can backward compatible into it, or an Xbox Series X. It's probably not worth it to buy a used Xbox One and just go one generation ahead. But yeah, Microsoft sells themselves certainly as this like genius programming web service, online service provider, and yet their own services are not working, perhaps because they intentionally have made it more difficult for them to work. Now, the good news about that, I guess, that you can still say is that a large percentage of Xbox 360 single player games will work, I think, perfectly fine if you never even plug in an Xbox 360. But that is only going to be for that generation of console. It's not the way going forward. And it would be much more difficult to hack a 360 and crack it to play the games than it would be to play PC. So it definitely feels like PC is the way going forward for long lasting. You're always going to be able to play your games even if you have to hack them and crack them because servers get shut down. But yeah, unfortunately there's still kind of a software operating system issue in that SteamOS is not available really to install on regular PCs. So if you are going to panic buy new computer hardware, you're probably going to end up installing an operating system that is not really what you want to stick with in the long run. Hideo's Kojima Death Stranding Definitive Edition is now, years later, available on Xbox. This is seemingly only happening because Hideo Kojima regained full ownership of Death Stranding after it sold enough to pay back the investment from Sony, or you assume that's why they got full ownership. It could be another reason, certainly. Clearly Sony had no interest in releasing it on the Xbox. Yeah. And if you started playing it now on the Xbox, you're probably going to be burned out on its gameplay style by the time they release its sequel. So yeah, this kind of delay probably will hurt any sales if Death Stranding 2 was released day and date on Xbox and the PlayStation at the same time. I'm still kind of holding out that there might be a abridged version of Death Stranding that would make it way shorter and more feasible that I'd actually spend my time on it. Although it's hard really for them to make a game like that because the main gameplay mechanic is just not one I want to engage with as far as delivering packages and moving across the country. PS5 Pro comes with an exclusive system theme. The console launched today for $700 or £700. Interesting dollar for dollar match on the pound at the moment. One of the things about computer chips that they're working on, but they may actually be successful on it. Who knows? These kinds of experiments take forever and often don't prove to be viable. But one of the things they're trying to figure out is how to make computer chips substrates on glass instead of silicon, which a lot of the overly competitive LCD manufacturers are investigating because LCDs these days are so incredibly cheap that the manufacturers aren't making a profit on them. Take-Two says that GTA 6 and Borderlands 4s won't release near each other. No one would stack huge releases. Both titles are due before March 2026. One would assume that Borderlands 4 could severely benefit from a delay, considering it was only teased and announced to make people forget about the Borderlands movie, whereas GTA 6 has already had a lifetime of delays. So yeah, that would make a lot of sense to me. So here's a interesting surprise. After 20 years, the Metal Gear Solid 3 character actor for Ava has revealed her identity She used a pseudonym, Suzette Minette, in the credits. And who was the voice actor? Well, it was the voice actor who played Ariel in the Disney movie. Let's see, Benson is the last name. Do we have a Jodie Benson? Which certainly kind of highlights that this is from like a documentary video that was put out. Kind of highlights how old Metal Gear Solid 3 is, and how, I guess, overly protective the voice actors were at the time as far as their image. Which, yeah, even 20 years ago, I imagine had you just put your real name there, there would have only been a few articles about it. Ava was a fairly lewd drawn character, like a lot of the females in the Metal Gear Solid, if not all of them, series. And yeah, clearly the actor felt it was a bridge too far. I wouldn't be surprised if Disney themselves had some like extremely long morals clause. In this documentary, they also mentioned that there was some kissing, making out scenes, and they said they made the sound effects from that just by kissing their hands, which, yeah, is interesting Foley work, I suppose, to have the voice actors themselves doing that, but whatever. It's an interesting reveal, and certainly it shows the greater need for credits to have always existed and for credits to exist these days, just so we can have accurate records. And certainly credits also help workers get more work. I imagine had this voice actor not used a pseudonym, maybe she would have gotten more work in more video games, and she very possibly may have gotten just a better career overall, because it does certainly speak volumes that your most known character is the Little Mermaid, and seemingly Benson has not done anything bigger else to even be mentioned. Sega, who recently said they were committed to releasing old games and supporting old games, has decided to probably resell all those old games to you. So over 60 classic Sega games are now being delisted from digital stores. Select titles will still be playable via Nintendo Switch Online. So I don't think I ever went on my way to buy all the Sega Mega Drive, Sega Genesis Classics collection. I think, in particular, there was a real financial problem there in how much they were charging way too much for these games in general. And it might also be a case that they weren't being emulated particularly well, which might also be an issue. But yeah, you got a long list here of very recognizable Sega Mega Drive games. Let's see, this was a very long list, in particular on Steam. If you buy the games now, you'll keep them forever on Steam, but I mean, should you support this kind of behavior on Sega's part? Yeah. Let's see. If I were to search this, that'll get me fairly quickly to Alex Kidd. So let's look at the Sega Mega Drive bundle for me. Well, apparently I did spend the money at some point to buy them, all for historical purposes. And 99 cents, though, is kind of expensive for so many of them that exist. So yeah, being a digital hoarder, I'm in a good spot. But I can't really recommend other people doing the same thing. Here, this is a lot of items. If they're all 99 cents, let's see, it'll tell me how many are at the top, won't it? What's this? $55 here, it says. So $55 basically to own a bunch of old games, many of which you'll never play or only play for a small amount. The requirements here pretty low. Maybe. I mean, there's really no reason why it shouldn't be Steam Deck compatible. But yeah. The only thing in this kind of maneuvering that would make this feel good is if Sega was re-releasing all the games much cheaper or for free. And frankly, they should just be re-releasing them for free. Just to build good fandom. Let's see, moving on. The disappointing Borderlands movie, I'm surprised Take-Two even mentioned them, benefited the game sales, says Take-Two. Well, I guess that's one reason why you would mention them. The company will continue to selectively license its IP for adaptations, but I think they will be much more selective as far as not including people as executive producers like the Randy Pitchford, former CEO of Gearbox Gaming and still CEO of Gearbox Publishing or something like that. But yeah, I think Randy Pitchford probably played a big role in why this movie was bad, but I have zero evidence to really prove that, so I can only throw out aspersions baselessly. There clearly, though, were high-level executive decisions that were a mistake here in stunt casting people and making a movie that really had very little connection to the Borderlands game, and picking Borderlands as a series that could have been a game series in the first place, a movie series in the first place, which it just doesn't really make sense for Borderlands to do that. The story is the least important thing in Borderlands. It's basically a joke, and yeah, certainly I guess I could rehash criticisms of what I've heard of the Borderlands movie to the point where I haven't actually watched the Borderlands movie and would only watch it if it was free. Meanwhile, a BioShock movie, you can pull that off, but I'm not sure you can tell the full story of BioShock in a 2-hour period. And it is still going to probably come off as more of a horror movie if done right than I imagine Take-Two would want it to be. So yeah, BioShock needs to be, if you're going to make a movie, it needs to be a horror movie, needs to be a relatively small budget, and needs to come out in Halloween, October time frame, competing against something like Saw or whatever that year's big horror movie would be. See, GTA 6 is still on track for a fall 2025 release. Take-Two reiterates planned launch window for Rockstar's highly anticipated game. Yep. There certainly is a lot of focus on this female protagonist being an inmate, having an ankle tracker from every promotional image of her, which, yeah, seems weird, because I'm not sure any of the other GTA characters start off by being caught by the police. So if your first female protagonist playable character in the GTA series starts off by already being caught, It feels a little weird. It feels a little sexist there, that women can't get away with crime, which, yeah, I'm sure they can. I'm sure they do. Although it's not typically, statistically speaking, the case that women do a lot of violent, gang-related type crime, which is what GTA really needs to be. Is that it needs to be either like mafioso or gang-related crime, where you're just constantly doing crime for the love of the money, for the love of the thrill. There is a danger, certainly in GTA 6, that the writers bend over backwards to justify or explain away why the first female protagonist is doing crime, when they haven't bothered to really do that too much with any of the other protagonists. But yeah, let's wait until the game actually comes out before we start criticizing the writing. Take-Two also has sold its indie label Private Division, basically saying all the games they sold well, but they aren't big tentpole games, and they're not interested in having a indie label that is just selling indie games. I wouldn't be surprised if, more accurately, this is them just developing the Kerbal Space Program to developers who have done a pretty terrible job, and assuming that there isn't going to be too many more indie games that would have been made or sold. And certainly they can make a new label if they wanted to publish an indie game here and there. Now, the criticism I've heard around this is that they basically started Private Division to sell indie games, smaller games, that weren't going to bring in as much money. So now justifying the shutting down of Private Division because they're selling smaller games that aren't making as much money is kind of a no-duh. Like, you started it on that plan to have a backup revenue source. And overall, just generally speaking, you're getting rid of a backup revenue source for no good reason, other than you're probably just trying to lay off people and make more shareholder value. Steam's new game recording feature is now available for everyone. The built-in system for creating and sharing gameplay footage works on the Steam Deck too. This might be more of a story that they've added it to the Steam overlay on PC than as much they've added to Steam Deck. Still very simplistic system, and I don't really expect it to grow that much as far as the system goes. I imagine they do want it just to be pretty simplistic. Although this does give a small bit of hope that maybe Steam, as a product owned by Valve, as a video game storefront, maybe they're just gonna heavily encourage people to put up their gameplay footage on Steam. And yeah, if they went down that path far enough, if I could stream to Steam live, and if I could and make money on it in some way, if there is a path to monetization, let's face it, that's the number one thing. But yeah, if I could stream to Steam live, if I could upload gameplay footage to Steam, and if there was an actual viewer base there, just a massive amount of people from Twitch and other sites like Kick and YouTube all moving to Steam to watch video gameplay footage, then yeah, that might be something very helpful to me, but that's a lot of ifs. It would be nice, certainly, not to be beholden to Google and their nonsense, or YouTube, which is just a very wide, diverse platform. Of course, that was the whole sales pitch of Twitch, and Twitch has devolved into being a terrible offering and a terrible site also. But yeah, we may see that right now they're probably thinking much more locally, friends sharing clips between friends. But who knows, there might be a point where you go to the front page of Steam and there is just links to people live streaming games there that you can watch. Certainly that is some of the competition that PC gaming has, is it is competing against people watching other people playing games instead of actually playing them themselves. Moving on, Divinity Original Sin 2 has been rated for the PS5 and Xbox Series X and S. Let's see, so new version of an old game. Alone in the Dark looks set to join the PlayStation Plus Classics catalog. PS1 version of the survival horror sequel was released in 1996. Alone in the Dark 2. Let's see. This is old news. This is old news. I don't know why my macros are still finding old news, but they certainly are. Which isn't the worst mistake to make, but is a waste of time. Still playing the Pokemon trading card game. Haven't updated my graphics drivers yet. That reminds me. Really, I'm almost already out of time and we haven't even gotten to the Gematsu news articles. So let's see if we can move forward. Silent Wings Reunion has been announced for the PS5, Switch, PC, and arcade. Let's see. No Steam link. I assume this is a shoot 'em up game. Yes. So we'll move on. Pocket Pair details the lawsuit filed against it by Nintendo and the Pokemon Company. Palworld allegedly infringes on 3 patents held by the companies. Well, that narrows it down to specific patent numbers, which I would assume may be United States patents that are being honored by Japan, or Japanese patents. So that's the thing here. This is literally just going to take me to a patents.google.com, which is not something I even knew existed. Yes. So these are Japanese patents. So you could, from this Gematsu article, actually read the entirety of the patents, translated to English. Hover over it, it's in Japanese. It undoubtedly is going to be in legalese, long-winded. They're going to describe and write everything as long as possible to be a catch-all to prevent anyone else from doing the same thing. Inherently, I could restate my distaste for patents on software and patents in general, in that they are not really helping society by giving this temporary monopoly to whoever files a patent first. It made some sense when you had to have a functional product, like building a new kind of light bulb or engine, and then submit that model or that full-size example of that functional product to the patent office to get a patent. But since they got rid of that, I think over 100 years ago, patents have just become kind of pointless and overused. At least copyright kind of makes some sense, in that copyright prevents people from photocopying the entirety of a book and then selling the book at a cheaper price. Patents prevents people from writing a book that is somewhat similar to the book already written, with only parody law perhaps protecting people who would do that. And that's what a lot of this is going to come down to, is that parody law will probably protect Palworld. I don't know how the Japanese courts will really lean. Ideally, these patents might also be found to be bunk, and they might be shot down, which Nintendo would be very unhappy about that. See, Sega has sold the Amplitude Studios to members of an internal team The Endless series developer is now independent. So Sega making a lot of moves in weird directions. Astrobot sales topping 1.5 million, we talked about. PS5 shipments, these are all from the same announcements. Ninja Kamu Shinobi Origins is coming to PS4 on November 14th and PC in Q4 of 2024. So we can see it already has a Steam page, and my macro actually opened up that Steam page. The Chinese fantasy action RPG Redemption of Li Yu Yin has been announced for PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. Which, okay. I don't know what to really think about a Chinese-centric, probably Chinese developer having a female protagonist. It's not something we've seen a lot of when you're doing these more historical looking games. Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster demo is now available. Type Noise Shonen Shoujo Hiyori Chapter demo launches today. Interesting, Shonen Shoujo. Those are types of manga, basically, visual novels, depending on who you're targeting. But I don't know if shonen and shoujo are the same words. I mean, obviously they're not the same words, but they might mean similar things. I'd have to remind myself. It's a romance visual novel and looks pretty weird. And there's certainly something to be said for weird. It's already on the fall list, so I must have already made a YouTube short around it. Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii DLC costume dragon of Dojima is available as a free bonus to Sega email subscribers. Which, okay, I guess. Subscribe to the email to get the free bonus if you're interested. And this is not on the follow list, so I must have not made a YouTube short on it. Warhammer 40,000 Darktide is coming to PS5 on December 3rd. It's currently available for PC, which you can see in the last 30 days it's been 83%, but overall it's at 69%. And yeah, I wouldn't put a game like this on the wishlist until it has recovered its overall, which it may never really do that, and then that makes it a very tough decision if there's just an overwhelming amount of negativity previously around the game and then they fixed it, but then there's just not enough people around to review the game to reflect that they have fixed the issues. Same is kind of the problem with like No Man's Sky. No Man's Sky's cross-save and PS5 Pro support and Mass Effect collaboration are now available. Kind of weird to have a Mass Effect collaboration. That seems too on the nose. Mostly positive as far as No Man's Sky goes. So I guess I can make a new YouTube short around this game if I want to. Indie publishing label Hook has been rebranded to 505 Pulse, which, yeah, okay, that seems weird. Red Hook is a different company. 505 Pulse published The Bloodline, The Magical Mixture Mill, Kingdom of the Dead, and Mudshot. Yeah, all games I really don't recognize. Pharmasia free Buddy Skin DLC is going to be released weekly from November 7th to the 28th, starting today with Afghan Skin Baby Tomato. from Asia is mixed reviewed and has very few reviews. It's only been out for a while, but it's definitely not on a strong start. The concept doesn't look amazingly terrible in that it seems like it's a half Pokemon like half farming game with some anime lewd looking characters, which maybe that's a little too much skin for the type of more kid-friendly game it seems like it would be targeting. The Famitsu sales for the 28th to the 3rd have been updated. Let's see. This last time we looked at sales numbers were surprisingly high for PlayStation 5, considering how the top 10 is usually dominated by the Nintendo Switch, and very often all top 30 are dominated by the Switch. This week it seems like while Black Ops for PS5 is still strong and Professional Baseball Spirits is still strong, Saga Revenge of the Seven is still strong. It does feel like the top 10 is back to being mostly Switch games, and then we have smatterings of PS5 games and the PS4 game. That does seem like it's still very, very strong as far as software sales for Nintendo Switch. And then hardware didn't really change last time we looked, and I imagine it's not going to particularly change here. PS5 outselling the Switch this week, the original Switch this week, and fairly high numbers for, I mean, that's just a massively high amount of numbers for the Xbox Series X Digital Edition, because its overall lifetime sales is only 5,000. So I don't know if they just did some kind of crazy sale, or if perhaps PS5 Pros are just not available, because noticeably PS5 Pros are not being mentioned here, which they wouldn't be mixed with the PS5 sales. Yeah, that may be hurting PlayStation sales overall, is that the PS5 Pro doesn't seem to be actually available yet. Let's see, Death Stranding Director's Cut now available for Xbox Series X, Windows, and Luna. More details there. That'll bring us to Gaming on Linux articles. Fedora KDE gets approval to be upgraded to sit alongside Fedora Workstation. Fedora Workstation worked with the GNOME desktop environment, which was at one time the very popular one used, but that was many years ago. Now going with KDE desktop. The question is, why would you go with Fedora as the core operating system underlying that? Yeah, you would have to know that there was a reason why you wanted to go with Fedora instead of going with Arch Linux with KDE, which probably is harder to install, or going with like Pop! OS or Ubuntu or something else. The comedy Renaissance artwork styled Death of the Reprobate is now out, which looks like a weird one. And let's see. Yep, definitely seems like a weird one. This is another case where I have not worked on my macros to make sure that it actually opens the links to these games. The cross-platform Nexus Mod app has expanded its Baldur's Gate 3 support. Further UI improvements have also been added. The Valve's Deadlock has added proper Steam input support with the Steam Deck improvements and a new hero. I imagine a lot of the development around Deadlock in its secret beta, that's not really a secret, are happening more in private experimental builds, and they're only putting out little bits of updates here and there for everybody else that's playing it in beta. Palworld detailed the patents that they're being sued for. The latest Prime Gaming November 7th edition still has great deals for free games if you're going to play them on Linux or Steam Deck, assuming you're not wanting the games in your Steam account. Long list here you can check out on gamingonlinux.com. Spell Brigade is an online co-op survivor like Bullet Hell, Friendly Fire, Chaos Festival, which that definitely seems like a mouthful of things to describe. Kojima Productions now fully controls Death Stranding IP. Also, it's now available on Amazon Luna Plus. NVIDIA GeForce Now will soon limit the number of hours you can play per month, but some memberships are getting upgraded in the quality bump. So some modes of the membership levels are going up to 1440p from 1080p. Again, I don't know who would be streaming though if you want 1440p graphics. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. Unreal 2 Back on Track arrives in early access for more co-op chaos. Crazy Vehicle Combat Roguelite Red Line Crooks is out now. Let's open that one. Let's see what that looks like to me. Yeah, there might be something there. And what the heck happened there? We are not at the end of the show, not by a long time, long point. I guess I gestured a little off and jumped all the way to the end when I was just gesturing to go one tab to the right. This article I think we had already talked about. Already talked about that. Already talked about that. Some of these are older articles, so we can just close those. And that'll save us some time. Yeah, this was one we had talked about before. So yeah, by the looks of it, this and this and this and this and this were all new stories, and this is old stories here. So it almost feels like it's in order. So maybe they changed how gaming on Linux works now. Maybe it always was in order and I just misinterpreted it as if it wasn't in order. Well, this is category articles, category Steam. So this is in order. This is actually a mistake. This page was opened because because the macro clicked on the word Steam. But the news stories. And so there is an argument, I guess, maybe to limit gaming on Linux to just Steam instead of game reviews, but I don't think that would really limit it at all. We'd already talked about that one too. Let's see. Yeah. So, yeah, Sega is delisting all those games. Once again. Steam Deck verified highlights for November 7th include Planet Coaster 2. Then By Sweet Caroline is an old story we already talked about. That's going to bring us to GameDeveloper.com, which is probably going to bring me to older stories. Again, that's yet another thing I haven't worked on as far as getting the most recent stories to open up from GameDeveloper.com. There's a lot of stuff I need to work on, but I am kind of more interested in scheduling videos, so I should embrace that impulse and actually schedule videos while I'm focused on that. Let's see. The FromSoft parent company, Kadokawa, is pushing into PC and console publishing. This is yet another Japanese company opening its eyes to PC gaming, which it's been a long time. PC gaming was a thing. The Famicom was considered a PC back in the day, but yeah, it's been many generations of console gaming being the only focus as far as Japanese developers go. Then I still have no idea who bought Private Division. I wouldn't be surprised if it's Embracer Group, and Embracer Group just doesn't want to get the press around that. GameDeveloper.com has this article, how devs can spot AI generated 3D models. Baked in lighting, mushy meshes, and high polygon counts are telltale signs of AI generated work. I wouldn't be surprised if there is just a massive amount of 3D models that are on the Unreal Asset Store and the Unity Asset Store that are being AI generated and sold. It would make a lot of sense for scammers to do that. And then Nintendo has lowered its fiscal forecast with Switch hardware and software in the decline, which it's funny to say Switch software is in decline when it's still the top seller of types of software in at least Japan and probably the world. Yeah. Before the whole concept of panic buying before tariffs existed, I was expecting a very slow video game season this year as far as Christmas purchases and all, but who knows what'll happen now. And then we need to very quickly go through all the new games on Steam. So like, I am so far behind. I really have no time at all to waste. I need to start as early as I can on these streams. And if that doesn't work out, then I would need to start streaming roughly an hour from now and stream later in the evening, which could happen, certainly, but it's not really what I'd like to happen. Noticeably, the 3-minute YouTube shorts that are coming out like pre-recorded footage because YouTube can't do a launch properly as far as introducing the idea of 3-minute YouTube shorts are not getting massive amount of views in the first couple hours at least. That's fine, they never really were. And there's just a whole different mentality around YouTube shorts in that I'm putting very little effort and time into them. I am putting some time into them because it's taking up my computer, and so I need to be as good as I can be about scheduling it to take up time when I'm asleep and not have it try and make YouTube shorts while I'm sitting around doing nothing. Yeah, I don't think there's ever going to be a time where something that looks like an RPG maker is going to get back into my graces enough that I would want to promote it. The genre has been effectively murdered due to oversaturation. Does it even support English? No. Yeah, there's a whole timing thing here that needs to be improved on. Does this really support English? It says it does. Question. It just occurred to me that if I can find a game that doesn't support English, then I probably should change the CSS some more on the page and move that warning up higher. I could certainly do the same for like early access. Inherently, I guess there's just maybe a sizing issue here. But yeah, I'd like to not have to scroll down to see things. I'd like to be able to see a price. I'd like to be able to see early access. There's room, particularly right here, but a lot of that would just be a case of Steam itself needs to have more of a dynamic, flexible website. And for the case of Steam, you really are approaching more of that Asian style of website design, in that you really need every square inch covered with data. But yeah, it will be certainly a kludge if I personally have to move the warnings and the price up. Whereas if Steam themselves updated their website, that would be better. And we still kind of have same old like nonsense. I'm gonna give this a follow, but I'm not gonna actually make a short on it, since the only reason I'm giving it a follow is because of the bikini clad anime girl. Proverbs. And a certain level, if I don't talk about the games as much, if I just kind of rush in silence, maybe I'll burn through the games a little bit faster. Because if I'm not talking about the games, maybe I'm not thinking about it that deeply. Yeah, really that's what I need to do, is just have a superficial visual assessment of the games, and then move on. Of course, still not doing anything with the follow list cleanup. I say it almost every stream now. Today would be a terrible example of where, if I was going to do follow list cleanup, that would just take up too much time. Like, for a brief moment it seemed like these streams were going to get shorter, where I would have had extra time to do a follow list cleanup, but no, that is deceptive, the length of how long it takes. Expands greatly once you start getting into the fourth quarter of a year. Even if it is still the case that the vast majority of games are garbage, there's just a higher percentage of games overall, and a higher percentage of games that potentially are going to be worth mentioning. And if I don't hurry up, I've got maybe 15 minutes before I'm gonna just have a phone call and abruptly end the episode. Alright, well, I was able to rush through all that, and I don't think I have anything else to really say. Let's see. Is there anything new as far as Steam Deck that I was trying to talk about? I don't think there was. And then, yeah, Team Nicholas. These are just tabs that I think were left open. Let's see. Well, anyways, I achieved my goal. That's going to be it for this stream. No drop frames at all. Seemed like a good frame rate today. So as long as the quality looks good, HVEC seems to be the better way to stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.